and everybody has to pay a tax to support the church. But if you built the church, you got some of that tax money. It was pretty clever if you think about it, because it gave people a lot of incentive to build a little church. But in 1550, they got rid of the last Catholic bishop in Iceland. His name was Jon Árnason. And the story goes, he was a holdout. He didn't want to convert. He didn't want to get rid of the Catholicism. So one night there was a knock on his door. He opens the door. There's a guy there with a sword. Off comes the head. And then they hunted down his two sons and cut their heads off as well. And that was it for Catholicism. Here's a nice view across this field here. So these days there is a Church of Iceland. It is the national church. There's no separation of church and state here. And it's a Lutheran church. But every major religion is represented here. In Reykjavik, there's a pretty big Catholic church that actually looks like a cathedral. We have mosques and synagogues and temples and everything you can imagine. Every major religion. There's even a pagan religion, once again. It's pretty strong, actually. I have no idea what they do. They're not practicing, you know, some of those crazy pagan rituals from 1,000 years ago, like sacrificing people, but I can tell you that that's the wedding you want to go to. They have a good time. So all the major religions are represented here, but it's a pretty secular culture. You never hear anybody really talk about religion. On any given Sunday, I think attendance in any church in Iceland is going to be something like 6 or 8 people, maybe 10 people, something like that. But the churches do still play a pretty big role. They're almost like community centers. And on weddings, funerals, confirmations, and christenings, the churches are packed. Most Icelandic kids go through confirmation. I think mostly they do it because they get a lot of money from their relatives, and you know. But you know, it's fairly secular in general. I mean, you know, everybody just kind of keeps it fairly quiet. But you'll see like musical performances and theatrical performances in the churches. So they really are kind of, you know, like just anchor for the different communities. You see all around Reykjavik, you know, all these, I don't know, dozens of churches. Every neighborhood has one. For me, I sort of like them out here in the countryside, just from an architectural point of view. You know, they usually keep them maintained, painted. In the winter, they usually have spotlights shining up on them. They just kind of give this sort of old-fashioned, almost like storybook quality to these places, if you know what I mean. But some of these churches aren't even used for the same purpose. I mean, one of the things you'll see here very often is a farm in the middle of nowhere and a church in the backyard, just for that farm. And that goes back to all those years. None of these churches, by the way, are the churches that were built 1,000 years ago, obviously. They've been rebuilt over the years and replaced, but I've been on some of those farms where the church is really just storage. You know, you go inside, it's like full of hay. So it's pretty laid back here. I also want to say a couple things about the language. Some of us were talking about this earlier, because there are some interesting aspects to this language, and some that you might not even expect. But of all the Scandinavian languages, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Icelandic, and Faroese from the Faroe Islands, of all of those, Icelandic and Faroese probably as well, the closest to the original Scandinavian language, which was Old Norse. You know, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark being part of mainland Europe, they've had a lot of influence over the last 1,000 years, and they've evolved in pretty, you know, different ways. But Iceland is a little island in the North Atlantic, and it's only been about the last 25 years that there's been any kind of immigration or tourism to Iceland. Even if we say 50 years.